It might seem unbelievable to many of us, but less than 50 years ago, in 1974, it was perfectly legal in the United States for a woman to be refused service when she tried to open her own credit card account. American women were denied the right to participate in the economy in ways like making purchases or establishing credit histories of their own until long after World War II. Yes, well into the 1970s. This amazing yet previously overlooked fact reveals how much has changed over the last few generations for women's rights and their ability to participate in the economy. Discrimination against women in early credit card industry. In the early days of the credit card industry, women faced blatant discrimination when it came to being able to access credit cards. Many women were not allowed to open their own accounts without a husband or father's signature and additional documents that men were not subjected to. This was an obvious display of sexism, as women's ability to be independent and make decisions related to their financial well-being was limited. Over time, women have thankfully gained access to more equitable policies in the credit card industry, but this is a stark reminder of how women used to be routinely discriminated against. Historically, women weren't allowed to open credit cards in their own name due to the patriarchal society that women were born into. Without the ability to obtain their own form of credit, women were unable to build financial stability and security for themselves and their families. Additionally, women's earnings have traditionally been seen as supplementary income as opposed to primary earners, which caused women to be viewed as less reliable when it came to paying off debt incurred through a credit card. It is incredibly important that women are given access to better resources that demonstrate their physical and economic independence. Access to credit cards with an individual's name allows women, just like men, the capacity to manage their own finances with greater control and autonomy over their money. History of credit card discrimination against women. Prior to the Equal Credit Opportunity Act in 1974, women had difficulty accessing credit cards. Things like being unmarried meant women were viewed as unreliable and untrustworthy, with women of color facing even greater uncertainty due to racial prejudice. Banks could refuse women without a male cosigner or deny them entirely based on their sex alone. Credit card discrimination against women was rampant, and barriers between women and credit were institutionalized by society through long-established practices. Unmarried women were unfairly denied the right to open credit accounts, which is an essential part of crafting a stable financial future. Despite women being independent and often contributing to their households financially, women's credit cards remained largely out of reach unless they possess a form of recognizable identification such as a marriage certificate. This was particularly concerning because women comprise a significant portion of the labor force around the world, but were being denied basic financial rights. Women were required to have a male co-signer on accounts such as credit cards until 1975, when a historic Supreme Court ruling overturned this requirement. This was a huge step forward for women's independence and allowed them greater autonomy in money matters without requiring permission from men. It's hard to imagine nowadays, but before 1974 women were not able to open any kind of account such as credit cards without having their husband's permission. This was a practice based on the idea that women couldn't take responsibility for their own financial matters and had to rely on men in this field. Thankfully, women's rights have advanced since then, so women are no longer required to ask for permission to open accounts. This right is now assumed, making financial freedom accessible to women of all ages. The outlook for women has changed drastically since the days when married women needed spouses' permission to open accounts, and now women are able to enjoy greater autonomy over their finances. Banks have also long enforced a discriminatory system when it comes to women's credit limits, while also relying on racial stereotypes throughout history. Even though women were among the earliest adopters of credit cards, they were met with monetary boundaries that kept their access to capital limited. As women and other minority-led businesses started growing in influence and demand, typical banks neglected to evolve and expand credit possibilities quickly enough. Banks began extending women more credit as recently as the 1970s, but only after laws forced financial institutions like banks and mortgage companies to loosen their restrictive practices. Unfortunately, the legacy of these past practices lingers still today. Women continue to face greater difficulty obtaining financing for their business dreams than men due to higher scrutiny or even higher initial credit limits. Until women began getting their own credit and debit cards in 1974, businesses often refused service to women unless they were accompanied by a male partner. This policy was seen as a way to protect women from financial instability, based on the idea that women didn't understand finances or weren't savvy in making money decisions. Thankfully, this way of thinking has evolved and women now have much more control of their own finances, with women-owned businesses increasingly gaining recognition and the financial support it needs for success. The change in 1974, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. 1974 saw a watershed moment for women and credit cards with the passing of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. This act barred women from being denied credit because of their gender or marital status, making it possible for women to open personal lines of credit independently from their male counterparts. Women all across the country had newfound access to financial freedom. No longer were women financially dependent on husbands or family members. Women now held the autonomy to build financial stability for themselves and their families through accessing loans and lines of credit that previously had been off-limits due to gender restrictions. The passing of this act was truly revolutionary in providing women a surefire pathway to economic security and independence. Prior to the passing of the 1974 Equal Credit Opportunity Act, women were not legally considered capable of accessing credit without a man present. This changed very quickly when the Truth in Lending Act and ECOA enacted laws preventing lending institutions from discriminating based on gender or marital status. This allowed women to apply for credit in their own name, have an individual credit score, and even receive women-specific credit cards, something unheard of before this time period. Back in the day, husbands would sign for their wives' credit cards, making it impossible for them to build up their own credit. Society has come a long way since then, but there are still some ways to go. Women have made great strides when it comes to financial freedom and equality, but there is still room for improvement. For example, women are less likely than men to be approved for loans and lines of credit. They also tend to pay higher interest rates on those they are approved for. The best way to combat this inequality is by continuing to educate ourselves and fight for our rights. We have come a long way, but there is still more work to be done. Subscribe to our channel for more expert career tips and unbelievable facts, plus the best career advice.